Imagine standing at a familiar crossroads. You know one of the paths is filled with pain, yet inexplicably, you choose to walk it again. It seems irrational, almost masochistic, but the truth is, this pattern is incredibly common. We repeat our worst mistakes not because we want to, but because something within our unconscious compels us to do so. Carl Jung would call this phenomenon autonomous complexes, hidden forces within us that shape our choices, often without our awareness. Jung described complexes as fragmented parts of the psyche, born from significant, often painful, emotional experiences. Picture a child who was constantly neglected. That abandonment creates an emotional core Jung would call an abandonment complex. As they grow, this person might be drawn to relationships that replicate that same dynamic. It's almost as if they're trying to recreate the conditions of the past to finally overcome them, but the result is usually the opposite, a cycle of pain and frustration. This brings us to a central point. Repetition is not random. There's an unconscious logic behind it. Jung believed that when we ignore aspects of our psyche, our shadows, they take on a life of their own. The repetition of mistakes is the psyche's way of saying, here's something you need to face. But instead of confronting it, we blindly follow, like puppets of our own traumas. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is made up of all the aspects of ourselves that we repress or reject. These darker parts don't disappear. They hide in the unconscious, waiting for opportunities to emerge. Often, they show up in the mistakes we keep repeating. For instance, someone who represses their need for affection might repeatedly choose emotionally unavailable partners. It's not a cruel twist of fate, but a projection of their own shadow. This concept resonates deeply with philosophy. Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, spoke of the eternal return, the idea that we live through repetitive cycles until we find the courage to break them. In both cases, the key to transformation lies in directly confronting these patterns, something Jung referred to as individuation, the process of integrating all parts of oneself. Another factor driving the repetition of mistakes is the paradoxical comfort of the familiar. Even when a situation is painful, there's a certain solace in knowing what to expect. Psychologically, this ties to the concept of psychic homeostasis. The mind, like the body, seeks stability. Thus, old patterns, even dysfunctional ones, are preferable to the unknown, which carries the weight of uncertainty. Here, culture plays an intriguing role. We are constantly bombarded with narratives that glorify overcoming challenges without acknowledging the complexity of the process. Learn from your mistakes, they say, but they rarely explain how to break the cycles of repetition. Jung, in contrast, argued that true change only occurs when we confront what lies deep within our unconscious. Carl Jung saw individuation as the path to psychic freedom. This process involves integrating all aspects of our personality, both conscious and unconscious. It's a deep and ongoing effort, but essential for anyone seeking to break free from cycles of repetition. One of the first steps is recognizing that our mistakes aren't just isolated failures, but expressions of an underlying pattern. This takes courage, as it means looking inward and confronting what we've been avoiding. Jung famously said, "What you resist persists," and repeated mistakes are the very reflection of this resistance. They're like an echo, persistently calling us back to something that demands our attention. However, individuation isn't just about facing the shadow. It's about making room for it and embracing it. Take, for example, someone who consistently chooses abusive partners. A superficial analysis might blame them for bad choices, but Jungian psychology seeks the root cause. What unconscious need is being expressed through this pattern? Perhaps it's a longing for validation or the reenactment of unresolved parental dynamics. Whatever the reason, it can only be integrated once it is acknowledged. Jung believed that the unconscious provides clues to our healing process, often through dreams. Dreams, he argued, are symbolic messages from the unconscious, offering guidance to understand our repetitions and internal conflicts. For instance, someone who frequently dreams of locked doors might be symbolically exploring the blocks preventing them from changing. Additionally, archetypes, universal patterns that inhabit the collective unconscious, also play a significant role. A repeated mistake might be tied to a specific archetype being activated. The archetype of the puer aeternus, the eternal youth, for example, might lead someone to avoid commitments, resulting in repeated failures in relationships or careers. Identifying these archetypes helps us understand the deeper layers of our behavior. There is wisdom in suffering. As uncomfortable as it may be to admit, repeated mistakes bring lessons that might otherwise remain hidden. Jung argued that suffering can lead to the expansion of consciousness, and it's precisely this expansion that allows us to see beyond the immediacy of the mistake. However, this requires learning to engage with our suffering rather than simply avoiding or repressing it. On a societal level, this idea also applies collectively. Societies often repeat historical mistakes, from armed conflicts to environmental crises. This happens because cultural systems, like individuals, have shadows they avoid confronting. Jung saw collective projection as one of humanity's greatest threats. When groups project their shadows onto one another, the result is destructive. Thus, individual transformation has a direct impact on the collective. Breaking patterns isn't easy, but it's possible. Practicing self-awareness is crucial. Jungian-based therapies, such as dream analysis, active imagination, and inner dialogue, provide tools to access and integrate the unconscious. Additionally, cultivating mindfulness and presence helps us recognize moments when we're about to repeat a mistake, allowing for more conscious choices. It's important to remember, however, that progress isn't linear. Setbacks may happen, but each small victory in the individuation process contributes to a larger movement toward freedom. As Jung said, "You don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Carl Jung believed that true transformation occurs when we find meaning in our experiences, especially the painful ones. Rather than viewing repeated mistakes as mere failures, we can see them as symbolic messages from the unconscious, pointing to areas where growth is needed. Jung referred to this as telos, the idea that the psyche seeks purpose, even if the journey is messy and marked by missteps. To turn mistakes into catalysts for growth, it's essential to develop a symbolic perspective on life. This means looking beyond surface events and asking, what does this represent to me? For example, imagine someone who repeatedly faces financial failures. Instead of labeling themselves as unlucky or incompetent, they might ask what money symbolizes in their life. Power, security, freedom? Often the answers to these questions reveal deeper emotional wounds that need attention. Resilience isn't just the ability to bounce back, but to learn and grow from setbacks. In Jungian thought, this requires embracing paradox, accepting that both light and shadow have something to teach us. This integration is crucial, as denying either aspect keeps us stuck in cycles of repetition. A powerful example of this can be found in mythology and literature. The archetypal hero often repeats the same mistakes until they confront their inner demon. Think of Prometheus, who defied the gods and suffered repeatedly for it, or Oedipus, whose fate was shaped by his inability to see beyond his initial ignorance. These myths aren't just ancient stories, they are symbolic maps of the human journey. The idea that mistakes carry a hidden grace may seem counterintuitive, but it's deeply rooted in many philosophical and spiritual traditions. Influenced by alchemy, Jung believed in the concept of coincidentia oppositorum, or the union of opposites. This means that extremes, such as failure and success, pain and pleasure, are not merely antagonistic, but complementary. Transformation happens in the meeting of these polarities. Psychologically, this principle is evident in the practice of active imagination, which Jung developed as a way to engage with the unconscious. Suppose you're dealing with a procrastination pattern that leads to failure. In active imagination, you might visualize procrastination as a symbolic figure, perhaps a heavy shadow or a stubborn child. By interacting with this figure, you can begin to understand its motivations and, more importantly, integrate its meaning into your conscious psyche. Repeated mistakes don't have to feel like endless cycles. They can become rhythms of growth. This requires ongoing self-reflection and acceptance. Jung suggested that by becoming aware of our patterns, we can rewrite the script of our lives. This rewriting doesn't erase the past, but reinterprets its significance. It's also important to note that transformation doesn't happen in isolation. Often, the support of a therapist, mentor, or community is crucial in offering new perspectives and tools. Jung saw the therapeutic relationship as a dance between two consciousnesses, where the therapist serves as both mirror and guide, helping the individual uncover what's hidden. Finally, recognizing that our mistakes are an inevitable part of our humanity can be liberating. We live in a culture obsessed with perfection, where failure is stigmatized. But, as Jung noted, it is through accepting our imperfections that we discover our true selves. He once said, "The healthy man does not torture others. Generally, it is the tortured who turn into torturers." By reconciling with our own flaws, we also contribute to a world that is less rigid and more compassionate. Understanding why we repeat our mistakes is a powerful step, but real transformation happens when we apply that understanding to our lives. Carl Jung's philosophy offers not only a deep analysis of our patterns, but also practical paths for dealing with them. To turn these insights into action, we need to cultivate practices that foster self-awareness and the integration of our experiences. One of the first steps is mindfulness. Being present in the moment allows us to notice the triggers that often lead us to repeat mistakes. Many times, we act on autopilot, unaware that we're recreating the same conditions that led to poor choices in the past. For instance, imagine you notice a pattern of emotional outbursts in conflict situations. Practicing mindfulness helps you recognize signs of irritation or frustration before they take over. This conscious pause creates space to choose a different response, breaking the usual cycle. Jung often emphasized the importance of engaging with our inner parts. He developed methods such as active imagination, which allows us to interact directly with symbolic elements of the unconscious. This practice can take the form of guided meditation or free writing, where you let images, thoughts, or feelings take shape. For example, if you feel stuck in a cycle of unfulfilling career choices, you might imagine this struggle as a figure, perhaps a lost traveler in a forest. By dialoguing with this figure, you could uncover surprising insights about what's truly blocking your progress. Every pattern has a starting point, an emotional or situational trigger. Identifying these triggers is crucial. This can be done through journaling, where you record moments of strong negative emotions or the urge to repeat a mistake. Over time, these entries reveal clear patterns. For instance, imagine you repeat mistakes in relationships because you feel an intense need to please others. By tracking your triggers, you might realize this behavior emerges when you fear rejection. This insight gives you the opportunity to work directly on that wound. Jung famously said, "We do not develop alone." The individuation process, while deeply personal, also depends on healthy interactions with others. Conscious relationships are those that allow for authentic exchanges and provide a safe space to explore your patterns without judgment. A partner, friend, or therapist can help reflect your behaviors and offer external perspectives. This is especially valuable because unconscious patterns, by definition, are difficult to see on our own. Change is a gradual process. Even with all the tools at your disposal, there will be moments when you stumble. These moments shouldn't be seen as failures, but as opportunities to learn. Jung reminded us that growth happens in spirals. We often revisit the same themes, but each time with greater awareness and depth. Remember, progress isn't about never making mistakes again, but about reducing their frequency and intensity. Every small victory is a step forward. Finally, it's essential to create regular moments for introspection. This can be as simple as taking a solitary walk, journaling, or setting aside time to meditate. These practices strengthen your connection with the unconscious and help maintain awareness of the patterns you're working to change. If repeated mistakes are, as Carl Jung suggested, messages from the unconscious, then our ultimate task isn't just to learn from them, but to integrate them into our life's purpose. This integration requires us to view our experiences as essential parts of who we are, rather than trying to erase or reject the moments where we fell short. It's an invitation to step back and see the bigger picture. Jung believed that every human being has a telos, an inner direction or purpose. This ties into the concept of individuation, the process of becoming whole and authentic. When we repeat mistakes, we are often unconsciously veering away from our purpose. Yet paradoxically, by recognizing and working with these patterns, we can realign ourselves. Consider someone who repeatedly chooses jobs that leave them unhappy. This pattern might reflect a repressed archetype, like that of the creator, yearning for expression. By recognizing this, the person can begin to explore what truly motivates them, allowing past mistakes to guide them toward meaning. Finding purpose in repeated mistakes involves, in part, redefining suffering. Jung believed that psychic suffering isn't purely destructive. It can be creative if we see it as an opportunity for growth. This aligns with the existential philosophy of Viktor Frankl, who argued that suffering takes on meaning when it is connected to a greater purpose. For example, someone who has repeatedly suffered in relationships might use that pain as fuel to help others overcome similar challenges, whether through social work, art, or simply by sharing their story. In this process, the mistake transforms from a burden into a source of growth. Jung saw our personal patterns as reflections of a larger unconscious, the collective. This means that by overcoming our own cycles, we not only heal ourselves, but also contribute to humanity's growth as a whole. He envisioned each individual as a cell in a larger organism. By facing our shadows and integrating our lessons, we participate in a collective evolution. Consider, for example, social movements that arise from shared personal experiences. Environmental activism, for instance, often stems from human errors, environmental destruction, waste, negligence, that when confronted can lead to collective awareness and transformative action. Jung reminds us that we will never be completely free of mistakes or failures, and that is a vital part of being human. Individuation isn't a final state of perfection, but an ongoing commitment to integrating light and shadow, error and learning. It's in this balance that we find true meaning. A powerful metaphor for this comes from alchemy, one of Jung's great influences. Alchemists sought to transform lead into gold, but Jung saw this as a symbol of internal transformation. Mistakes are the lead of our psyche, heavy, dense, and seemingly without value. Yet, by working with them, we discover they are the raw material for our inner gold. The final step is to embrace life with awareness. This means continuously observing yourself, learning from each new mistake, and remaining open to the lessons of the unconscious. It's work that never ends, but also never stops rewarding. Jung said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." That choice is in our hands, even when the journey feels circular. Each repetition, each stumble, brings us closer to wholeness, if we have the courage to look within and make peace with our story. If you enjoyed this content and want to keep exploring deep topics like this, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your experiences with repetitive patterns in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to check out the videos on the end screen. They're packed with transformative insights for your journey. See you next time.